I'm calling to order this hearing or roundtable. This is a public roundtable with the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council, Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Wednesday, October 29th, 2025. The time is 2:32 in the afternoon, and we are having this hearing or roundtable in room 412 of the John A. Wilson Building. The subject of this hearing is budget execution and agency overspending. This is the third of three hearings we scheduled on this topic. The purpose of these public oversight roundtables is to explore the problem of agency spending beyond what was appropriated in the annual budgets approved by the council. Every year, agency budgets grow by hundreds of millions of dollars after the start of the fiscal year through supplemental budgets, spending from rainy day funds, and reprogrammings. For instance, in FY24, six agencies spent approximately $325 million more than what had been budgeted originally by the council. In FY25, overspending is projected to be several $100 million. This pattern of overspending makes oversight, accountability, and accurate budgeting difficult. These roundtables will help the council ensure existing budget controls are being used and investigate if there are any changes that need to be made to existing budget processes. The record in this matter will close at 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, November 12th. I want to add, we filed the notice of this hearing on September 30th. We invited the chief financial officer, I believe, on October 10th. I learned yesterday you have a hard stop at 4:30, which is concerning to me because these hearings have been lasting for more than 2 hours. I do want to note, yes, this hearing is starting late. I am an official over at the Council of Governments, which had a meeting that began at 12 with regard to WMATA funding, and they didn't get to the vote on the resolution, which is non-binding, but suggests that the district will have to come up with a couple $100 million a year. We didn't get to the vote till about 2 o'clock, so that's why I'm here late, because I just arrived back in the building. So if we don't get through all the questions, I'll recess the hearing. Councilmember Parker, do you have an opening statement?
I'll be brief for the sake of time. This is a really important topic. I have been interested in getting folks together, including the CFO and members of his team, to look at government spending. I agree that agency overspending is an issue, but I also think our government is bloated and inefficient in some ways. And so I'm looking to hear how we might examine the effectiveness of our programs, make sure that we put more money in the pockets of our residents, and do better by taxpayer dollars. So with that, I look forward to today's hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. And at the moment, there are no council members online. So, Mr. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you and good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson and members of the Committee of the Whole. I'm Glenn Lee, Chief Financial Officer of the District of Columbia. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before the committee, and I look forward to discussing today how our team at the Chief Financial Officer, at the Office of the Chief Financial Officer, OCFO, can further support the District Council in conducting its fiscal oversight responsibilities. With me today are OCFO Deputy CFO and Budget Director Eric Kennedy and General Counsel David Singh. My testimony will focus first on our collective budget execution processes, and then I have some concluding thoughts about fiscal oversight. Before I start, I want to thank my team at the OCFO for their hard work and dedication. In particular, I would like to thank the Office of Budget and Planning, the Office of Revenue Analysis, Associate Chief Financial Officers, and agency fiscal officers, and all staff who tirelessly work to deliver and help maintain balanced budgets, strong bond ratings, and annual clean audits. I'd also like to thank the Mayor's budget team, as well as the Council's Budget Office, for their collaboration in the often arduous task of producing and maintaining balanced budgets year in and year out. Thank you. The district's budget execution process starts when the budgets are approved. The council appropriates resources for district expenditure in the annual Local Budget Act and in subsequent supplemental local budget acts. Generally, the district's budget acts set the top line and agency appropriation amounts by fund type. In addition, the acts establish rules or limits for the use of those funds, reflecting the priority of district lawmakers. Working collaboratively with council and mayor budget staffs, OBP produces a multi-volume set of budget books that supplement the council's approved local budget act to provide guidance at a granular level for implementation of the approved budget. However, a budget is not static. During the year, actual use of services, district costs, or revenue collections will deviate from what was assumed in the budget. One way the district addresses these circumstances is through a supplemental budget with which changes appropriations for the current fiscal year. Historically, drivers for these supplemental requests largely fall into three categories: unanticipated changes in the use or demand for existing programs, changes in the costs of personnel, goods, or services not contemplated in the approved budget, or in some cases, introduction of new programs and services. The Anti-Deficiency Act, ADA, provides critical institutional guardrails for managing the district's budget execution. The ADA provides a variety of rules that essentially prohibit agency managers from spending in excess of appropriations established by council. In addition to these rules, the ADA requires agency managers and their AFOs to develop monthly spending plans based on the approved budget. These plans are developed at the start of the fiscal year for virtually all district agencies. The monthly plans form the basis for the quarterly expenditure reporting process required by the ADA, known as the Financial Review Process, FRP. The monthly plans also serve as the basis for OCFO's apportionment of agency budgets within the district's financial system. An apportionment is a division of an agency's appropriated program authority by program, fund, and expenditure type by period of fiscal year. Both quarterly expenditure reporting and the OCFO's apportioning of the budget are mandated by the ADA. These processes provide the baseline ecosystem for budget monitoring and control in district government. But whether mandated by the ADA or not, the size and complexity of the district's budget requires monitoring of spending relative to the budget as an ongoing necessity. The primary tool used to monitor budget execution is the financial review process, or again, FRP. FRP assessments and supporting materials are completed at the end of each of the first quarter, the second, and the third quarters of the fiscal year. FRP assessments are developed by agency staff and AFOs. AFOs support the development of these assessments by validating financial data, spending projections, and assumptions made by program staff members. Once completed and signed by the AFO and agency head, FRP assessments are then submitted to OBP for review and approval. While OBP's review of assessments is comprehensive, particular attention is paid to spending pressures. And by spending pressures, what I mean is spending trends that, if allowed to continue for either for that quarter or for the rest of the year, would lead to spending that's greater than the budget authority allocated to that activity or cost. OBP collaborates with AFOs to ensure that strategies to remedy these situations, and we call those gap closing plans, are developed by agency program staff. Over the last 3 years, OBP and the AFOs have focused on improving gap closing plans so that they provide detailed insight into the proposed approach to resolving spending pressures. An important component of the FRP work is convening a spending pressure task force and meetings for that task force for the purpose of developing and vetting strategies that mitigate spending pressures. Participants include OBP staff, members of the Mayor's Office of Budget and Performance Management, our AFOs, and our associate CFOs. Completed FRPs are submitted on a quarterly basis to the council. Reprogramming is one tool used to make necessary changes to the allocation of budget authority. A reprogramming permits an agency to modify its allocation of budget authority, typically at a more granular level than provided in the council's annual appropriation, but reflected in the spending plan. Programming requests typically address unforeseen developments which change spending trends from what was anticipated in the approved or supplemental budgets that were adopted by council. Per both the Home Rule Act and district law, reprogrammings are submitted by the mayor to the council for review and approval. My office's role with respect to reprogramming is to verify that the reprogramming will not have an adverse impact on the agency's budget or the district's financial plan, and not violate other restrictions imposed by law. Once the OCFO verifies that these two criteria are met, a reprogramming then is sent to council for approval. Generally, reprogrammings constitute a small share of the district's budget. For example, operating budget reprogrammings between agencies, or or authorities moved between agencies, constitute approximately 1% of overall approved budget each year. The reprogramming law and the ADA work together to support budget execution and management. In effect, the ADA prohibits spending more than is available, as identified in the budget, and creates an ecosystem of monitoring spending, while reprogrammings provide a mechanism for the mayor and council to process and reallocate appropriation authority to address spending pressures identified by reporting mandates in the ADA. As I've described, the district's budget execution processes include multiple activities executed by staff from OCFO, the executive, and the council. My team alone commits thousands of hours of time to these processes. Our efforts range from working with agency managers to mitigate spending pressures, to assisting agency staff create reprogramming requests or develop proposed supplemental budgets. Collectively, this work ensures the districts doesn't spend more than the council appropriates. In conclusion, my colleagues and I believe strongly that robust oversight by the legislative branch is essential to this process. Frankly, it is the cornerstone of our democracy. Fiscal oversight by a legislative body is an opportunity to evaluate if the public resources are being used in a way that achieves the goals of policymakers at a reasonable and predictable cost. Such oversight also serves to enhance transparency for elected leaders and the public, which is especially important during the challenging economic times the district faces. Whether during budget hearings or at other times of the year, I think the council can provide critical oversight by assessing whether programs are providing adequate benefits given their costs, to your point, Mr. Parker. To that end, our team is available and stands ready to engage with you, Chairman Mendelson, and each committee chair throughout the year to review agency spending in advance of and subsequent to the publication of FRP assessments. We can also work alongside agency staff with committee chairs to determine what information can be helpful with their oversight endeavors and is supported by the reporting we already compile. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions and questions that the committee members may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. 10 minutes. We'll start with Mr. Parker because he is going to leave at 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to go first here. I'm going to jump right in. At a previous roundtable this committee had, we heard from the auditor, Kathy Patterson, that the repayment of loans and interest line representing debt service has grown from 347 million in local funds budgeted to 1.1 billion across 2 decades. And this is a fund or a line item that the CFO's office oversees unilaterally. And it has been consistently used to account for agency overspending, as I understand it. Can you speak to that debt service line and justify the amount of funds that you are budgeting for it?
Absolutely. First of all, just a bit of the basics of what that line represents. In effect, it represents our debt service payment for bonds we sell for capital projects. The amount of that is governed in, I believe, both the Home Rule Act and certainly in District Code as a limit to how much that line can be relative to the rest of the budget. And so both the mayor's office and the council develop spending plans for capital that depend on borrowing such that you spend nearly that cap, that amount. And as a result, it grows annually to reflect the fact that we borrow more and more to pay for capital.
So you would argue that you don't have discretion in that amount, that it is proportional to our capital budget, I guess.
That's exactly right. It reflects the debt service of the bonds we borrow for the capital budget you collectively agree to through the budget process.
Understood.
So it's the credit card payment, if you will, or your mortgage payment. Now, that's the big picture. The small picture is what do we do to estimate that value from year to year? We estimate what we expect to be the actual or the spend that's appropriated through the capital plan and that will be supported by bond sales. So in other words, if the capital plan says we need 600 million or $1 billion in bond sales this year to support capital spending, then that means that we need to sell a bond of $1 billion.
And I got that just for the sake of time. And so when agencies overspend, which has happened frequently as of late, that is the line item that your team is tapping to cover those expenses?
It could be one of many. The key is that why that estimate varies on the margin. Some has to do with decisions by our bond team as to when to sell bonds, the volatility of interest rates, and the pace at which capital commitments are occurring. In other words, if we have a year where there's a lot of capital spending, it's keeping up with exactly what was anticipated, our next bond sale will be the full amount needed for the next round of spending.
Understood.
And if not, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. And then the last question here, what was the delta in the last fiscal year from what was budgeted and what was actually used?
I think you're referring to the roughly 100 million that was used as part of the year-end reprogramming.
Yeah.
And so that was the delta.
Right. And so toward the end of the year, around August, as we set up for a fall bond sale, we reevaluate the spending pace of capital projects. We look at the market and look at opportunities for debt service savings through refinancing, as we just discussed. And in August, then we recalibrate what we think for the rest of the year and then moving forward. And we do this a couple of times a year and always in August. Why August? Because it's toward the end of the construction cycle. So by then you have a real good idea of what's happening with.
And I'm just speaking out loud. I totally get then the need to reprogram those funds to make use of them. The issue I would then have is that the mayor gets to reprogram those funds versus there being council input in that process. I mean, granted, we have to approve that reprogramming, but
so you don't. That's your opportunity to don't, and then, yeah.
Perhaps. I would just throw this out there. I've been intrigued as I've looked at the home rule charter, of the ways in which the council can compel the mayor to put forth a supplemental budget, which allows for much more robust council input. But I do want to get to one other question in my remaining
Yes, sir.
time. What instructions does your office give to agency fiscal officers when they discover that an agency is overspending or is spending in a manner that is likely to result in overspending by the end of the fiscal year?
So earlier, and during CFO Lee's testimony, he talked about the FRP, and that is the report that shows the spending trends within an agency. Prior to that report being published, the agency's fiscal officers working with program staff to mitigate any potential overspending. And by the time the report gets published, the hope is that that spending pressure has been addressed to the point that it's solved. If it hasn't, because it can't be, then it gets reported in the spending pressure with a gap closing plan. However, the instructions that we typically give OCFO agency fiscal officers when they meet with program staff is they highlight the fact that you see this increased trend in spending in a certain area, and then they come up with ways to work with the program staff to come up with ways to mitigate that. There are times when,
For the sake of time, how often is that report produced?
that report is produced either, it's definitely produced quarterly, but sometimes if there are changes in between the quarterly reports, then they produce a monthly report.
And so according to my notes, we have 8 major district agencies: the Department of Public Works, DC Public Schools, Fire and Emergency Medical Services, MPD, Department of Behavioral Health, Office of the Chief Financial Officer, the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, all of which spent beyond their council-approved local budgets in 13 of the last 20 years. Now, that may not be all of your responsibilities, but what I'm getting at is what disciplinary actions, if any, has your team ever taken against an agency that is routinely overspending?
So we don't take disciplinary action against an agency. We work with the agency to mitigate overspending or to try to reduce overspending.
So hypothetically speaking, your team is engaging with me, agency. We're meeting, you produce your report. I routinely, quarter after quarter, am overspending year after year. At no point is there a mechanism to say, we're going to hold you accountable or we're not going to approve.
So let me, in order to address your question, I'd have to do so in a comprehensive way. And this might not happen in 3 seconds. So to begin with, the FRPs are just it's just a report. It's for the public. It's a mechanism. It's so that you can, it's transparency. It's so you can see what's going on in the agency. Work is being done every day.
In the last minute and 40 seconds. But fundamentally, doesn't your office have to approve agency spending? At some point, you have to have insight and knowledge that this agency has routinely overspent.
And so what we try to do is address that through budget formulation. If a department is chronically overspent in a particular area, such that they had to be supplemented, and because of overspending as opposed to a change in program level that's been agreed upon by the council and the mayor, then we will work with the mayor's office to reformulate that department's budget so that that budget then at the next go around is corrected.
What that ultimately results in is that the council is then told, as the body that has the authority for appropriations, you cannot spend X amount of funds because we are working with the mayor to address overspending of the agencies in which the executive oversees.
So we can work with agencies to try to stay within, and we do, help them for themselves to provide options to limit the problem. So for example, suggesting or helping them execute hiring freezes.
You could, in theory, though, tell an agency, we do not authorize spending for these line items or beyond this point. Is that correct?
Occasionally, we try not to. We try to get the agencies to have the responsibility to know what to reduce in order to live within their budget.
Okay.
And a last resort is the reprogramming, which is ultimately then a decision the mayor makes whether or not to submit it to council. Or
Okay. I am over time. Thank you again, Chairman, for allowing me to jump the line. Thank you.
Thank you. As you know, the Home Rule Act lays out the duties of the Chief Financial Officer. In several places, the law requires the CFO to, quote, ensure that appropriations are not exceeded, unquote. Quote, maintain systems of internal control designed to provide effective control over and accountability for all funds, unquote. And, quote, apportion the total of all appropriations and funds. I'll repeat, apportion the total of all appropriations and funds so as to prevent obligation or expenditure in a manner which would result in a deficiency or a need for supplemental appropriations during the year. And I'll read that last part again. Apportion the total of all appropriations and funds so as to prevent a need for supplemental appropriations during the year. However, we clearly do have a need for supplemental appropriations every year. And every year, agencies spend hundreds of millions of dollars beyond what they are appropriated at the start of the year. I don't see how the OCFO is apportioning the total of all appropriations and funds so as to prevent a need for supplemental appropriations during the year. And I do not see how the OCFO is, quote, ensuring that appropriations are not exceeded, unquote. In June, the OCFO projected $180 million in overspending for the FY25 year on top of the $130 million in overspending that the supplemental was correcting. So how am I wrong?
how are you wrong about?
The law requires that the CFO, quote, ensure that appropriations are not exceeded, unquote, and, quote, to apportion the total of all appropriations and funds so as to prevent a need for supplemental appropriations during the year, unquote. I don't see this happening. How am I wrong?
From our perspective, district over time has evolved a process of both supplemental budgets and effectively supplementals called reprogramming, such that we have 200 a year at least that have been routinely proposed by the mayor and passed by council. The notion of spending over appropriation authority is that we look at the total, not only approved budget, but the supplemental and reprogrammings, and ensure that we don't overspend that total amount. Now,
so what is the meaning of the words, ensure that appropriations are not exceeded?
that's what I just described. We look at that as the accumulative number for a particular department relative to approved, the supplemental.
So
And
then
then
how would we write a
reprogrammings.
law that says that an agency can't overspend? How would we write that law if it can never occur because there's a supplemental? How do we write a law that says so as to prevent the need for a supplemental? When the need for the supplemental, I don't know how.
No, I understand what you're saying. So I think
Well, let me move on to this. We
I
heard
think I
last
have
week.
an answer for you.
Oh, go on.
Don't entertain a supplemental ordinance unless it's a program you want to expand. Reject all reprogrammings. So that then the processes that
So-
have evolved for the last 10 to 12 to 15 years are disrupted. I respect that that is your authority. I respect that that's your authority, but the mayor can submits the supplemental by law. The reprogrammings.
So then you would support, are the council disapproving the supplemental that's pending right now, the $9
That
million?
is your choice. That is your choice. Our job is to facilitate it being
If we
constructed.
reject it, it would make the agency directors deficient, wouldn't it?
Of course.
Okay, you
course.
support that.
Well, if they spend more than their appropriation as
Well, that's
opposed to
what the
allocating.
reprogramming is about, is to,
In some cases. In
no,
some
that,
cases.
there've been 3 reprogrammings in month 13. The third one, I believe, is still pending. The reason for the 3 reprogrammings, you know this, is because there was overspending in agencies. It's moving money from underspending agencies to overspending agencies. So my question is, how is the OCFO ensuring that appropriations are not exceeded? And your answer is, well, we have a process of reprogramming and supplementals. So in other words, the answer is that an agency will never overspend. Well, actually, we could disapprove the reprogramming and then the agency will be deficient. You'll support that? So it's on us to prevent the overspending by disapproving the reprogramming rather than on the OCFO to, quote, ensure that appropriations are not exceeded, unquote. I'm happy to move on to the next question.
No, I'm observing years and years of practice where the mayor and the council have agreed to these changes mid-year. And to be honest with you, departments have to adjust during the year for a variety of reasons. The budget is nothing more than a set of estimates of expenses. Those expenses can be influenced by things that are not known during the year. So at some level, there has to be adjustments to budgets, but I understand your point.
Well, I don't know. I'm deeply frustrated that it appears that we pass a budget that has no meaning. If we say that an agency is limited to $100 million, they can spend whatever they want because practice has been that we'll do reprogramming. So then what's the point of the budget? But let me move to my next question. We heard at last week's hearing that the OCFO prepares quarterly spending plans for every agency. How are these plans developed? Do the spending plans provide agencies with a specific amount of spending authority each quarter? How does the OCFO keep track of agency spending against the plans? Is the spending tracked at the agency level or is it tracked down to the account level? The essence of my question is,
Yes.
Are there spend plans and do the spending plans provide agencies with specific amount of spending authority each quarter? I assume that, well, I'll let you answer. And then how do you hold them to it?
Yes, we collaboration with agency or program managers create spending plans, actually start as directed by the Anti-Deficiency Act with monthly spending plans. And it is at a granular level, and it depends on what department. Some departments are more granular than others. From that information, then we create the quarterly spending plans that are based on these monthly plans.
Well, we
And
reviewed,
Then
I'm
the
sorry.
quarterly plans are the basis for the financial review process. And so, and our spending plans and our actual spending is tracked against both the monthly and the quarterly because they're correlated, of course, very precisely by our controllers and agency fiscal officers.
So we reviewed spending plans for 4 separate agencies in advance of this hearing: OVSJG, DME, DHCF, and DGS. The planned expenditures perfectly match the actual expenditures for every agency for every quarter. Are the spending plans actually a plan, or are the planned expenditure amounts keyed to match the actual amounts to show no variance?
Yeah.
So when we talk about apportioning and the spending plans, the agencies have the ability to look at their spending and align it with their expenditures that, or their actuals. So in other words, you do the first quarter plan, and then you have what's remaining for the last 3 quarters. And the agencies have the ability to align it with the remaining portion of the budget and say, this is how we're going to spend our budget.
For example, departments may have been delayed in getting some hiring done or so forth. So therefore, they would have to adjust their spending plans for the rest of the year to reflect the fact that they're hiring up more quickly. So and as well as some agencies have seasonal spending patterns.
Well, in
that
the
make-
plans we looked at, you take the full number for the year and divide by 4, and that's the monthly or the quarterly spend plan.
And that's the
That's
case
not-
of mine as well. So
That's not much of a plan.
that is
Well,
a
let me-
precise plan if you expect constant spending throughout the year. My organization is a good example of that. We have very little seasonality in our spending. We're driven by payroll. Payroll is driven by the fact that we're primarily full-time employees. So dividing our annual budget by 12 is a really good starting point to understand what our spending plan should be. It depends on the agency. Highly cyclical agencies, that may not be realistic.
But we're not seeing variation by quarter with these spend plans. We're not seeing really much other than just taking the budget and dividing it by 4, and that's your quarterly spend plan. Agencies that are hiring up because they have something new, we're not seeing any variation. It's just a bunch of even numbers. But I'm over my time. I'll turn to Councilmember Fruman.
Thank you very much, Chairman Mendelson. I'm going to stick on this subject because in your testimony, there is a description of the development of monthly spending plans, and the monthly spending plans are created at the beginning of the fiscal year.
Yes.
And the implication is that it's a monthly spending plan for every month in the fiscal year. But what happens at the start of the fiscal year? Do you get monthly spending plans for the whole fiscal year, and when do you get them?
We generally have them completed before the fiscal year starts. We use that information then to apportion the spending across the different attributes of a budget. So in other words, how much by program, by activity, by fund, by cost type. We load that into our system so that as expenses happen, we can monitor expenses relative to those expectations.
So you have them at the beginning of the fiscal year for the 12 months of the fiscal year?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And so then in this, what Chairman Mendelson was getting at the end of the quarter, that monthly spending plan might be revised so to match actual spending. So the fact that a plan was laid out at the beginning of the year, it's just a marker. It changes. That itself is a living document. Is that right?
Yes, because if you've already gone through 3 months and you can see types of spending that occurred that you anticipated to be more even, for example, either were accelerated or delayed relative to that quarter, you would expect then the new updated 9-month plan to reflect what actually happened in the first 3 months.
Yeah.
But so appreciate that all of this is, it's the system or the processes we use to track spending relative to expectations of the appropriated budget.
No, I hear you, but I mean, there's the appropriated budget, then there's the plan, which is developed based on what the agencies suggest, and
Yep.
we do
Right.
changes to it. And then they have a monthly plan for how it's going to be spent. And you are evaluating where are they relative to those monthly plans. But the monthly plan changes by the end of the quarter because if spending is different, they change the quarterly report. So for us, I mean, I would expect, stick with me here.
Okay, that,
I would expect the FRP to tell me, how did spending vary from the plan? And I'm hearing that that's not what it's telling me.
No, it does. And first, I want to make a point to both you and the chairman. We can adjust these processes with the information that we provide, if that's of value. I just want to start there. I don't want to have a conflict when it's not necessary. We have a lake of data of actual spending as well as these granular plans. If there's different ways to portray the information that is helpful to individual committee chairs, please, we'll work with you to make that happen.
Well, that I hear you. Go ahead.
But I want to say that we look at the results of a quarter. And from those results, if they're not aligned with the plan, you would expect the rest of the plan to be adjusted to reflect what happened in the first quarter.
No, I understand that, but
That's the change.
yeah, so I understand that, but I think for me, in real time, trying to do oversight,
Yes.
I want to know how the spending differed from the expectation, and then how spending across the year may have changed as a result of that. If instead, before we get to me getting that report, you make adjustments to what is the anticipated spending and it matches the actual spending, I'm not seeing that
Right.
blow by blow difference, and I think that's important.
And there's no reason why we can't engage with you over the departments in your committee to assess the difference. What happened? We've gone through a quarter. We're spending at a faster rate in these programs, lower rate in these programs. What did that information do for us to then agree that we can change the spending plan for the rest of the year? That's a good dialogue to have. We would happily facilitate that.
Okay, I am going to want to do that because I want to know in real time,
Understand.
how are we varying from what the plan was?
Because those discussions are happening at a tactical level with our agency fiscal officers.
And I understand that, and I see in your testimony, there's all kinds of work sort of behind the screen from the perspective of the council. And I don't know whether there's a role for the council in there. You're trying to figure out what's going on and what are the mitigation efforts, and then you come to a level of confidence for you, the CFO, that there's a reasonable plan in place and I can apportion. But a challenge, so in that process, if the AFO and the agency say, we've overspent by 10 million in this area, but we're going to do a reprogramming, do you then say, okay, we'll approve based on your plan for a reprogramming, and then we get the reprogramming at some point later? Or do you say, I will not apportion until you have an approved reprogramming?
I don't believe go ahead. We do not apportion before the reprogramming is approved.
So
Yeah, please.
to provide more detail to that, if an agency is overspending, then that horses out the barn and you reprogram to address that spending gap, or you do a supplemental or something else. If an agency intends to change the plan, but they require reprogramming, that plan is not changed until the reprogramming is approved.
You have to approve it.
So the FRP comes out, how long after the end of the quarter? So
30 days, we have 30 days after the quarter to get the spending plan, the FRPs out. There are times when, and this is an important point because I've been asked this before by the chairman, I've done my best to answer it. Why do sometimes he doesn't get an FRP exactly when we say he's going to get it? That has more to do with our review of the FRP. If it's not sufficient, we will not approve it, we being the Office of Budget and Planning, and send it back to the agency and work with the AFO and the agency to mitigate that. Now, one of the things that we have not done, we have said we're going to start doing, as part of our evolution of the FRP process, is alerting the council when that happens so that they understand the delay. But otherwise, 30 days at the end of the close. Yeah.
Okay, and when do you do your apportionment for the next quarter?
You're talking about that happens in the spending plan.
And when does that happen?
Those happen, you see the report quarterly, but they start work, they do monthly as well, but you see the actual report quarterly.
But when do you do it? When in the quarter?
I don't have the dates with me, but it's each quarter. I don't have the dates actually.
My guess is it would vary depending on cluster or agency, but to be clear, if it we do not develop a spending plan that presumes an action by council, either an agreement to it. If we do, that's a mistake. That's not our process. And so I just want to be real clear with that.
So, but what could be happening is if there's a reprogramming, if it's required that there's a reprogramming and a move from one agency to another, then you would wait for that to go through. If instead you had an agency that over or underspent in a quarter, but they were revising their plan internally for that agency going forward, that may or may not come to the council. Would that come to the council?
It would show up in the spending plan would change, so you'd see it there, and then the FRP, you would see where the movement in the FRP, you would see where they move things around.
But to the chairman's question of in that kind of movement inside of the agency during the course of the fiscal year, correct me, CFO Lee, I don't think we have the ability to say we won't approve that. That's happened under the radar and it turns up in the FRP, but it doesn't come in front of us as a reprogramming that we would need to approve or not approve.
So if I may, as I said in my testimony, I'm a big advocate of us collectively thinking how each committee chair would like to engage with the budget process to correct these timing questions. The reality is we have people that live this information every day. As I suggested, we can meet before FRPs are actually completed because they're a month after the quarter. There's no reason why our staff can't provide updates with key program areas or departments at much more frequent interval than that, so that you understand what's coming, what pressures we're pushing back on. Ideally, we'd like the program managers with us so that everyone is clear with that. There's no reason why you can't see a fair amount of that discussion because at some point it's too,
So that's great. I mean, this is why this series of hearings or roundtables, Chairman Mendelson, is so valuable, because I think the tools that we have are actually not adequate. But in this process, we could craft tools that could help us have real-time oversight in variations in spending that is stronger than what we as a council have today. So thank you, Chairman Mendelson, for holding these roundtables, and I turn it back to you.
Thank you. So I feel stuck on this issue of the spending plan. The DC code says by October 1st of each year, an agency head and agency fiscal officer shall jointly submit to the chief financial officer a monthly spending plan and a Schedule A, each by source of funds, based on the budget submitted to Congress. So we asked for the spending plans for 4 agencies. I mentioned the 4 agencies. I have in front of me 2 of them. I do not see how it is a monthly spending plan. I do not see how it is a plan. So, for example, the Deputy Mayor for Education, the columns are, let's see, there's one column without a caption, but it says underneath it, private grant fund, private donations, local fund, all fund. The next column is controller source group. The third column is approved budget. The fourth column is revised budget. I'm not quite sure why the spend plan that is prepared by October 1st of each year would have a column for revised budget. But okay. Then the third column, or the next column after that, is the spending plan total for a year. which for every number is identical to the revised budget. And then the next column is year-to-date planned expenditures and obligations. I'm not understanding why a spending plan would have year-to-date, anything year-to-date. The next column is year-to-date actual expenditures and obligations. And then after that is year-to-date variance, and year-to-date variance as a percent of plan. We asked for the spend plans. Now, if this isn't the spend plan, I asked that you provide me the spend plans that were prepared October 1st, either for this year, and I'm guessing they're actually prepared during the month of October, not by October 1st, even though the code says by October 1st. And if you don't have them for FY26, then I'd like the ones that were prepared by October 1st of FY25 for FY25 that were prepared in October 2024 for OVSJG, DME, DHCF, and DGS. If they're different than what I have, but we asked for the spend plans pursuant to 47-355.04, and it is not by month, it's not even by quarter. It has year to date. I don't understand why there would be year to date, and I'm not quite getting how it is a plan. What I also find interesting about this document is that in the column of actual expenditures, when I compare that with the column for planned expenditures, they are identical for every line. So continuing full-time for DME, this is third quarter, $3,526,427.42 is the planned expenditure, and the actual expenditure was $3,526,427.42. Exactly the same. Line after line after line, the actual is exactly the same as the planned. That's not a plan.
I think we could have a very productive hearing going through in detail what the plans are. I reviewed several myself in preparation. So
Were they different than this?
I had monthly information along with the other variables that you described, which appreciate those are templates we're providing. So they're meant to be, they'll look different, even if the actual expectation of outflow doesn't change. Some of the other variables you are identifying there would vary as you get those throughout the year. We would be more than happy to provide a detailed hearing or private briefing or
I don't want
paper
any of
document that would describe in detail what the plans are, how they're structured. So, because without seeing what you're looking at, I can't explain.
Well,
But the bottom line is we're happy to do.
I understand you don't have what I have, but what I have is what we requested and what we were given or led to by the OCFO. The law requires by October 1st of each year, an agency head or agency fiscal officer shall jointly submit to the chief financial officer a monthly spending plan and a Schedule A, each by source of funds, based on the budget submitted to Congress.
Right.
And so I would like to see that from the four agencies. If you would please provide that to us. I want what was either submitted this month or what was submitted 1 year ago in October for FY25.
We'll do both
Because
years.
I don't think these are plans. And I was around when this law was written. And the intent was that every agency would have to figure out their spend plan, a plan. The spending is not going to be the same, identical quarter to quarter to quarter. I'm thinking Department of Parks and Recreation. They open pools and do all kinds of stuff in the summer that they don't do in November and December.
That's right. So
And Board of Elections, which has elections in June, but not in, I have to be careful what month I pick. So, the spending is going to vary.
Right.
And it also is going to be, the law says by month. We were told quarterly. I don't know that I care that much whether it's month or quarter, but it's going to vary, and that's just not what I have. Let me keep moving here. Are the quarterly spending plans given to the committees as required under DC Code 47-355.05?
I'm sorry, please say that again.
Are the quarterly spending plans given to committees, that's council committees, as required by 47-355.05?
We have a practice of making them available to the council budget office, and I believe your office, and I understand as of now, committee chairs have access to those reports as well.
Well, we don't, because this is what we have, and it doesn't sound like.
I'd ask you to look again, because I know that the links went live.
Well, we've
Yes, that
asked-
they are, and I don't know why sometime in the past, we decided not to provide to committee chairs. I say that collectively. I can't speak for that decision of my predecessors. I'm just saying that right now, these plans are available. And to the plan you're reviewing, I don't know what you're looking at. I don't know what your staff asked for, and I don't know,
Well, we
I
have
don't
a-
know what you asked for, and I don't know whether we mistakenly delivered the wrong item, but at the core, again, I looked at several plans. They were comprehensive, as you're describing. I know we do this. We spend hundreds of hours compiling these. They're done before the fiscal year in order for us to apportion for every department, as we're directed to do in our financial system, which is where we record both the adopted budget at a granular level and, of course, spending. So I would covet the opportunity to go through that process in detail with examples to yourself, the committee as a whole. And
So-
if the more time we commit to financial oversight, the happier I am, because this is my profession. And I'm very impressed with the processes we have. And I can't say what you're looking at. I apologize if we sent the wrong, if the question wasn't formulated in a way that we understood what you were asking for. But I do know what we produce, and we have to do it in order for our financial system to work. So I would love that opportunity.
Well, we have a very capable and competent budget office, and our budget office, which has a number of people in it, have all been working on this in preparation for this hearing. And this is the best we got. And we got it in, I'll say we got it in consultation with the OCFO. And this clearly is not a spend plan. It is clearly not a monthly spending plan. It's not a quarterly spending plan. It's not a plan. So again, I repeat my request that you provide for those four agencies the spend plans pursuant to 47-355.04 that either have been prepared this month or were prepared 1 year ago for FY25. And I will add, we've asked each committee staff, and it does not appear that any such plans have been sent in recent memory to any committee. Now, you said something a minute ago about apportionment. And I didn't focus on that. But my question here is, many states use monthly or quarterly allotments as a budgetary control tool to ensure that spending stays aligned with appropriations. How frequently does OCFO apportion funds to agencies? And once at the beginning of the year, quarterly or monthly?
At the beginning of the year is when the majority of the apportionment happens. We apportion the adopted budget or approved budget at a level much more granular than the appropriations that are passed by council.
So
Those
then
are
how-
updated. Yes.
So then how does an agency spend more than what's apportioned to them?
Well, they appreciate that the process that we used of tracking spending relative to those apportionments identifies when there's rates of spending that are exceeding what the plan calls for.
I'm not, if you apportion on a quarterly basis, and I don't know, I'm assuming.
I
you
understand.
apportion on a-
I'm answering a different question. I apologize. So we do have in our financial system at a very granular level, expectations or limitations, if you will, of spending that reflects the appropriated budget. We do. We load that.
Okay, so that's not the same as
So-
apportionment.
Well,
Apportionment is that I have a budget of $100 million. My spend plan says I'm going to spend 30
Yes.
in the first quarter and help me here 20 in the last quarter and an even amount in the other 2 quarters.
we have
You
that.
give me 30, I have 30. I can't spend more than 30 this quarter. That's apportionment.
No, and
Do you
that's
do that?
what we have. And if a department is having trouble, then we work with the agencies to mitigate that. If the mayor chooses then to.
I'm not understanding if the money is apportioned, the agency cannot overspend. If DPW gets 25 million, they
No, I
can't
understand. I
have a
understand what you're
spending
saying.
pressure of more than 25 million at the end of the quarter.
I understand what you're saying. We engage before those triggers are pushed, before that spending is over the amount set aside. That's the point of all of our processes, is to identify rates of spend that will lead to breaking through a limitation.
I'm confused because the overspending that we fixed with the supplemental was actual overspending. It was not year-end projection. And the reprogramming, the $90 million reprogramming that was just deemed approved was actual spending. It was not a projection. It was actual spending. So I'm trying to remember, one of the agencies was DPW.
Go ahead, Nancy.
How did they actually spend more than their budget if their money was apportioned? I think maybe we have a different interpretation of what the word apportion means.
So when an agency, and we'll use the same words, overspends, this can be reflected one of 2 ways. Either, in both cases, we report it as a spending pressure. You could see the actual overspending where the agency has spent above or beyond what that given program, fund, accounting fund, whatever the attributes we're looking at. That's one way. Another way is that they can project that they're going to overspend, in which case, and in both cases, what happens is you do one of 3 things. You either
My question is not about the projections right now. I'm asking
Okay.
about apportionment. So let's take rapid rehousing, which I think is called RPS. FRSP. Let's take rapid rehousing, FRSP.
Mhm.
My understanding is that they have already spent or obligated about 75% of their budget for the entire year.
Okay. I don't know, but okay, I'll take your word for it.
Okay, that's how much they've spent. So clearly it wasn't apportioned.
Because how much they spent or how much they've obligated.
Obligated.
Okay, so the obligation is not, we don't consider that as spent. It is a liability, but it is not actual spend.
So you allow obligations without the budget?
There's budget for the year. You cannot obligate without budget authority. The system will not allow you to obligate without budget authority, without some form of override.
Have you apportioned the FRP, help me? Have you apportioned the FRSP?
That is separate from what we're talking about now.
No. So
If you have an agreement, if you have an agreement, a purchase order, contract, whatever, you obligate those funds. Those funds don't actually necessarily, those funds don't go out the door that day, but you have to create the liability.
I
From an accounting
understand that.
perspective,
There's not much difference between an obligation and an actual expenditure. It's still required to be paid, correct?
But it's not.
it's not. It's from an accounting perspective, it is different. So you can obligate funding. So right now, in about 2 weeks, you're going to look at the available balance report. And you're going to see all of these obligations, which we call encumbrances. Forget about the pre-encumbrances. And you're going to see those encumbrances go away. And a portion of those, I can't say how much, are going to liquidate. They're not going to be spent. Because you're talking about a plan to spend, but until you realize an actual or an expenditure, it is a plan to spend. And under ADA, you have got to provide evidence that you have the funding to enter into that agreement. So because we work the type of accounting that we do, it's not on a cash basis. So we obligate. And
All right, so we've gotten off on a tangent about obligation, and my question was about apportionment, and I'm way over my time, and Councilmember Fruman is pointing out that even though I'm the chairman of this hearing, that I'm not being fair. Mr. Fruman.
Well, I wasn't using those words, but I wonder if I can be helpful here because
Thank you.
there was something that CFO Lee said about most of the apportionment happens at the beginning of the year, which I was surprised. Is the apportionment that happens at the beginning of the year for a quarter? Or is the apportionment that happens at the beginning for a longer period than the quarter?
We reflect in the system at a detailed level the amount, what we call the portion amount that we expect to see or we expect to spend throughout the year in the financial system.
So the apportionment is for the year out of the
It-
box.
it
And
is.
so if there is an excess of spending compared to the spend plan in the first quarter, it doesn't kick in an apportionment issue. It kicks in a resolution issue because apportionment has already happened. That's how I'm understanding it. Is that right?
Yes, effectively, that's exactly right. Yes, so that, I think that's really an important point because we're the notion of obligation versus spending. What's overspending relative to the total appropriation versus what you otherwise would have expected be spent in a quarter? The time frame issue and the obligation versus spending. We're talking about spending. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I hear you, but it also, what it goes to is we've been thinking you have an apportionment power that you could withhold apportionment during the course of the year because of overspending. And that's a mirage because you've done your apportionment up front and you don't have that tool in the same way quarter to quarter. That's what I'm hearing.
Go ahead. Yes.
so the apportionment, spending, quarter to quarter, week to week, week to week, day to day, month to month, it changes. So you have this, and that's why, and what we sent, to be clear, what we sent Jen's office was, we sent quarterly spending plans, not monthly, and we will send the monthlies as well. So you will see in the monthlies, those adjusting spending plans. You see it in a quarterly, but then you don't see it.
I totally get it. And
Yeah.
we talked about it. The monthly spending plans are a moving target and they're based on all of the internal work that you're doing.
Yep.
One of the things that we have thought is that you have a tool that if there's overspending, you can withhold apportionment. I think that's not true. I think you've done most of your apportionment at the beginning of the year. I think on the monthly spending plans, everybody is going to want to see those monthly spending plans as put forward on October 1 of the fiscal year, because that's what the executive is saying with the money that the council has given us. Here's how we plan to spend it on a granular month-to-month basis. It'll move, but we want to know on October 1st, what is it that they thought was realistic and compare what happens against that. So, second, the desire to get those documents right out of the box.
Okay.
The fact that things move, I get it that things move, and I want to talk about the mechanics of how they move, because CFO Lee, in your testimony, you talk about the FRP process, and you say once completed and signed by the AFO and the agency head, the FRP assessments are then submitted to OBP for review and approval. While OBP, so when does that happen? When is the FRP internally with your AFO and the agency head for does that happen inside of the quarter, or if the quarter ended on September, well, and September's end of the fiscal year, for the quarter ending December 31st, when would that internal FRP be done?
So we don't do fourth quarter FRPs because, just to answer your question succinctly, we don't do fourth quarter FRPs because
That's the September 30th one, but what about this?
we do second, third, and fourth quarter. So the second quarter FRP will come out. We have up to 30 days to, after the quarter ends, to provide that, to approve and provide that FRP to the council, to the auditor, and to the members folks. And that's how it works.
Okay, so that's the FRP. So there isn't an FRP that is done after the first quarter, after this.
That's it. It's a first quarter. I'm sorry, I said second. It's the first quarter. I'm sorry.
So I hear that should come to the council by January 30th.
No,
Days.
it ends. So you usually get that report. I think I'm going to say February, March. I don't have the dates in front of me. I did provide you all with the schedule, but I don't have the dates in front of me. So you get it after the first quarter ends. We then look at the agencies submit to us an FRP that's signed by both the AFO and the agency director. They submit to, I'm with the Office of Budget and Planning. It's submitted to the Office of Budget and Planning. Our folks review it.
When does this happen? So
It's at the end of the first quarter.
So, no, okay, so December 31st, do you get that January 10th or do you get that January 30th?
We get it in February, so something, I don't have the dates in front of me, I'm sorry.
Okay, but it's like February. and-
Yeah, it's 30 days after the quarter ends, because we have to let the month close. Because we don't let the month close, and the data that you get is not useful.
Okay, so into February, and then it goes over to OBP's for its review.
Yes.
And the review of assessments is comprehensive. Particular attention is paid to spending pressures and to ensure that any gap closing development plan developed by the agency program ensures spending does not exceed expectations. So when does that starts in February?
No, that actually starts, so the fiscal year starts October 1st. To be candid with you, we start looking at spending probably the beginning of the middle of end of October. And so we start working with, we produce.
Yeah, but I'm talking to you about the FRP that comes to me.
Yeah, that's part of the FRP.
But that comes to you in February.
But before then, we start working on, what actually goes into that FRP is we start working with the AFO counterparts who work with the agencies. We start working with them well before an FRP is produced, well before. And so what you see is the final result of that. There could be an instance where you might get a first quarter FRP and it may say spending is good, but sometime in October, November, it wasn't. And so, and working with the AFO and working with the AFO, working with the agency, they were able to resolve some of the spending trends that they started seeing that were occurring early before the FRP. So you get the final result, but there's an effort that starts to occur as soon as the fiscal year begins.
Okay, so the way in which it's described in the testimony is a process is completed, it's handed over to OBP, but you're saying that these are parallel processes.
I'm saying that one is the end result. The FRP is the end result of working with the AFO, working with the agency from October 1 up until they got to publish an FRP. We have a spending pressure task force that meets prior to FRPs where we go.
So the bottom line, this is a continuum of activities.
Yes.
That lead to the FRP. And what Eric is describing is the details of the work that leads to that final report you have. I want to make a clear point here is that I think there's opportunities for our staff, as apparently happened years ago, to engage with committee chairs in the interim, to give them a sense of what's happening so that you're not waiting until this final report is complete.
So that's the critical thing, and I was trying to
I
understand
think
the
that's the
time.
time. I think the process is not least under code and what we actually do, because there's a lot of work that goes into this, that will continue on. The critical issue is getting to the committee of the whole, the chair and the committee chairs, information that's more timely in whatever state it's in for their oversight purposes.
And that's why I was trying to go through the timeline and understand it. In the next paragraph of your testimony, you
Right.
talk about an important component is the spending pressure task force.
Yep.
And that has OBP staff, members of the mayor's office, Office of Budget Performance Management, the AFOs, the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. Missing in that process, and maybe it's not, the council needn't be in exactly that process, but missing from that kind of review is the council and the committee chairs, because we want to know these things in real time too.
Right. And ultimately, it's up to the mayor to decide what to bring forward as a reprogramming or a supplemental need. So that conversation will happen. That's a decision that may not be made. But separate from that, engaging with committee chairs and the chairman, it can happen and should happen from my perspective.
Okay,
So
Yeah.
you understand, because maybe there are spending pressures that the administration, with our help, can sort out so that it never becomes a reprogramming that you see. So that has to happen in a separate room, if you.
So, I tried to predicate that maybe that isn't the committee that we are a part of, but the information should be shared with us in real time in a similar kind of
It can
way.
be. Yes.
And so again, let's pick up on that after the hearing, and my time is done.
Thank you.
Councilmember Henderson?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to sort of pick up on a little bit of the conversation around the FRPs and AFOs. This is more of a process question, but something I'm sort of curious of. When there's a new agency director that comes in, is there a initial meeting between the agency director and their AFO to understand what the duties and responsibilities and what they're able to do for them, et cetera?
In every instance that I can think of, again, be mindful, I'm the Deputy CFO of Office of Budget and Planning. I don't work in the agencies, but I'm in constant dialogue with our associates and the AFOs. In every instance that I can think of, the associate meets with them or attempts to meet with them, and the AFO definitely meets with them. It may not happen on day one. It really depends on the schedule of the director,
Yeah.
but it does happen.
Okay, so in our hearing last week with the CA and Director Reed, she said that AFOs are the ones that initiate the FRPs, FRPs. Yeah, FRPs.
Yeah, so FRPs are it's a collaboration between the AFO and the agency program staff. The agency program staff have to provide input to the AFO, and the AFO validates the validity of the fiscal data as it relates to the FRP. With respect to spending, the timing of spending,
Yeah.
the initiative, the things that the funding is going to be spent on, that is solely the agency program staff.
But is there an advisory role in terms of the AFO saying, hey, I don't think you actually have enough money for this?
Absolutely, that comes into play in every single instance that I can think of.
Okay.
And so, and I would suspect in that dialogue, you'll also find that an AFO will say, listen, we don't have that in our budget in this particular category. And I'll just use words like that instead of getting into the attributes and all that.
Yeah.
In that particular category. And my suspicion, this is me sort of walking through what I believe does happen, having worked in an agency once before myself, likely that agency director will say, is there a way for us to do this? And at that point, the AFO will give advice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of the FRPs, because we've seen some of them, right? And one of the things that I think was a critique and or criticism is under the explanation of how are you going to sort of get on the right track? A lot of it just says, oh, we'll just figure it out at the end of the year and the cleanup. And so who writes that explanation? Is that
Closing plan?
yes, is that the AFO or is that the program staff?
That's both. That's both. Because, and the reason it has to be a collaboration is that the AFO does not have at their disposal the ability to say, you're going to get additional resources. That you're going to put money in a supplemental. That has to be a dialogue between not just the AFO and the agency director, but with my mayor counterpart, Jenny Reed, in her office. And it works really well. Now, with respect to the gap closing plans, that has been an evolution. I'm just going to be very candid with you.
Oh,
We have evolved. We're evolving, getting better at that.
Okay.
I recall 4 years ago that we realized that there was a weakness in some of our gap closing plans. And so we revamped the process.
Okay.
And we're constantly looking at that. We're doing training now. We do training at least once, hopefully start twice a year. And we're actually going to revamp the FRP process yet again for the second quarter FRP. So that is an ongoing effort that we're making to make that better. And for the people who are looking at it, they can look at it and see exactly what's happening versus having to try to infer from all these different, tables and
Yeah,
things.
because they call it a plan, but it doesn't look like a plan. A sentence
Yeah,
is not
it's-
a plan. A sentence is
A
a
sentence is not a plan. A sentence is not a plan. And so we are, in all transparency, there were weaknesses in that area,
Okay.
and we're evolving it and improving it. And yeah, that had to happen.
okay.
And I, to be candid with you, I'm very appreciative of the feedback that we've been getting from everybody about those gap closing plans. Even one of the audits that we're currently under, the feedback was very helpful. And so we're, as we speak, we're revamping it again.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know. So for Q2, it'll be a different.
For Q2, it will be a different process. It will look a little different. We actually had the advantage, I just want to give him a shout out, of getting a staff member who used to work in the agencies and with the AFOs, and his input was invaluable. Because I'm in the budget office, and while I deal with people every day, I talk to people every day, I'm not actually on the ground.
Yeah.
And so the folks on the ground, we have a person on the ground that's helping us evolve this process yet again. And that's going to happen. We're going to have to evolve it every year.
So let me ask this. I think the FRPs can actually be a very helpful tool, not just for the agencies, but also for the public. Why aren't these public?
They are on our website, I thought, but if they're not public, let me.
They're on your website and you know exactly where to click and you
I
have
see.
a link to get to it.
Okay, so let me make a
There's-
promise. Let me make a promise. I promise you that if under law, that's cool, we can do that. I can't see where it's not.
Okay.
We will make it more transparent. That's my promise to you.
Mine as well. I wasn't aware that they were not on our website, so if they're not. They are. Okay.
But
We will,
some-
yes, and it's not very helpful.
To be very helpful, right? If I could just go and check sort of the drop down menus and kind of find what I'm looking for, that would be more helpful.
I think that we should have a hot link on our website with those plans. I
Okay.
agree with completely.
Usually I feel like the executive might push back, but y'all are here today and it's your website.
Well,
And to be candid, CFO Lee has talked to me about this a number of times. And that some of the things you're asking for, he has directed me to do. And we're working on it.
Okay. So you said in your testimony that the Anti-Deficiency Act requires agency managers and their AFOs to develop monthly spending plans based on their approved budgets. Does the Anti-Deficiency Act require them to abide by the monthly spending plan or just create the monthly spending plan?
it requires them to abide by that, I believe. And I was going to say that, but it's subject to revisions at our discretion then, the OCFO's discretion to adjust them. And that language then provides this environment that we've been describing of back and forth with agencies to work with them to get their spending trends back down to matching their final appropriation for the year.
Okay.
So we facilitate solutions and try in many different ways to constrain practices that are leading to over expenditures.
Okay.
And that has to be a collaborative point. So I just want to describe, to be very clear, that language, yes, it's binding, subject to our review and approval to change. And so we've created a whole process around that kind of flexibility.
Okay. Well, so then let's talk about overtime, which is, I feel like the area where much of this quote unquote flexibility kind of comes up for a lot of the agencies. Now, every year when we get the budget books, I look at certain agencies' proposed overtime spending, and I have to kind of laugh because what they are proposing in the budget, so i.e. what the agency has sent to you guys to certify in the budget, is already 3 to 4 times more than what they've already spent in that current fiscal year on overtime. So, for instance, when DHS says we're going to spend $40,000 on overtime, I'm chuckling because you've already spent $3 million in the current fiscal year. That would take an extraordinary effort for you to spend 40 grand. And so I feel like we're approving an inadequate amount of overtime based on it's not realistic from the very beginning altogether. You know, what are those conversations like between you all and the agencies when you're doing the certification, looking at like, this was your current spend?
So I'll tee you off here. So I agree. And I've asked our budget team to rethink our formulation process, our dialogue and rules with the mayor's office about how they adjust, how we collectively work to develop and formulate the budget so that those, if repeated overspending by category, like you're describing, we can't do it anymore. Now, if it's 1 year over a 5-year look, that's different unless we have a reason to believe it's ongoing. So Eric can describe specifically what that engagement looks like, because I agree with your point.
Okay.
And you do it once, it's someone else's fault, twice it's your fault, 3 times you're just not paying attention. So we've got to change our formulation to match those kind of hot button categories of spending that are repeatedly an issue. Eric.
So I think you heard Jenny Reed say a couple times at maybe both the hearing that her, or the roundtable her and I came to together, and then the one with the city administrator, that we got with her team earlier on and we said, look, we've got to rebase overtime. We've got all this data from the pandemic period that tells us, MPD, for example, there's no going backwards. This is where they are now. It's not uncommon that we have to go and rebase. We did that with corrections many years ago. And then we added like 45 FTEs and that helped bring down the overtime. MPD is a little more complicated. So, however, we are now looking at, I think it's like 8 or it's a handful. It's more than a handful of agencies.
Yeah.
I actually had a meeting late last night, not too late, with Jenny, and we're rebasing them. We're going to say, listen, the overtime here is here to stay, and it's gonna be recurring. You've seen cases where in the past we've increased overtime for the first year of the financial plan, but we may have made a portion of it one time because we weren't sure. To be candid with you, that was my idea several years ago because we couldn't get our arms around the overtime, but we now know that we need to make it recurring because it's here to stay. And so you're going to see and we're more than happy to provide the analysis that got us there. I'm actually, my team is in the process of reviewing it now from all of our AFOs and ACFOs, but in public safety and justice, this is probably, we have the biggest issue here. You'll see the issue in DHS, you'll see the issue in DPW.
You see
In OUC, public safety and justice, you're gonna see that because the nature of their calls are different now. The way policing, I don't know anything about policing, but the way that I suspect the mayor has to employ or the chief has to employ people, it's different because there's a lot more going on in the city. And so we cannot use 5-year practice, 5-year-ago practice, 2-year-ago practices. We have to change those now in terms of how we budget for overtime. So you're going to see that in the upcoming budget being submitted to the council in whenever it's due. And again, this is a collaboration. Just like I collaborate with your budget office, I spend an inordinate amount of time with Jenny. We pretty much talk every night, even on the weekends. So we're going to make those changes.
Okay. Thank you. I took extra. Thank you, Eric.
Sure.
You took some extra.
And we're
over.
running out of time. It's,
Yeah.
we have about a half an hour left. Where we left off. So I made the brash statement about an obligation being the same as an expenditure, and I was corrected. An obligation is different than expenditure, okay? So what is an obligation?
An obligation is a commitment to make a payment over some time period.
So then why isn't it binding?
Oh,
If it's a commitment,
It
why
is,
isn't it
is
binding?
binding, and for most systems, most financial systems, you cannot spend, how should I?
So then why
explain?
is an agency allowed to obligate more than their quarterly apportionment?
Well, go ahead, yeah.
So Chairman, there aren't, that I'm aware of, except in financial crisis, places, government that do apportionments quarterly. I remember we did that back in 90,
So you're doing apportionments quarterly.
not in the obligation sense, not in an accounting obligation sense. That typically is only done, that type of apportionment
But
is,
why aren't you doing that for these agencies that are historically overspent?
well, I'm gonna give you why I believe. Historically, you don't do that. That is the break glass in case of emergency. We did apportionments back in the 90s when I was here. And that was done because we were out of money. But when you commit to a contractor, that obligation needs to be reflected in your accounting system.
I'm not asking about how it's accounted for. I'm asking about how you treat it.
So
And that's different. And the difference is this. Somehow, agencies are allowed to obligate right up to and in fact exceeding what their budget is. Because you told me you don't let them spend more than their budget. But I'm not understanding how overspending occurs.
An obligation for, from a technical sense, is an agreement to pay a certain amount of money over a period of
A
time.
commitment
so
is
can
the
I-
word you use.
Right, so if a department has $10 and they make a commitment of $7, they cannot spend more than 3 more. And our processes are set up to prevent that from happening.
So that, no, they're not. Why did we just deemed approved a $90 million reprogramming for agencies that were overspending by roughly $90 million? They were overspending by more than $90.
So they're not related to an obligation. I think we have a
Then
definitional
they
issue here.
related to an expenditure.
They were related to spending of services, maybe
So
overtime.
they have 3 categories, which is an obligation, an expenditure, and spending? Because somehow we had to do a reprogramming of $90 million on top of
Right.
the 130 we did in the supplemental.
So I just want to corral the notion of an obligation formally is where you've made an agreement, a tactical or a legal agreement to make a payment over a period of time. And what happens when you do that, you don't have an expense for that amount, but a system doesn't let a department spend against it unless it's for that specific obligation. That is, so, but
Tell me how we are going to overspend on rapid rehousing this year, which is more than 3/4 obligated, 1 month into the fiscal year, has exceeded its budget every year. If an agency cannot obligate over the budget, how does this happen? If they can't expend over the budget, how does this happen?
in the case of the example you provide, it's likely a caseload growth. There isn't, I'd rather not use the word obligation because it's more a long-term commitment to a contractor typically. That's some of your spend. Some of your spend is related to payroll. Some of your spend is related to direct services that you're providing that you don't know about a month before you provide it because that's the nature of the program. So the core issue you're asking is if an agency is spending at a rate that is likely by the end of the year going to be total spending more than the appropriation authority that you've provided, we use these processes to identify that issue. If the executive does not have a strategy to deal with that, they have the choice to bring to you a supplemental or reprogramming to redirect resources to that program. So
The law
Yeah,
says
explain
that
the
the CFO is to ensure that appropriations are not exceeded. What I think I'm hearing from you is if the agency has a plan to reprogram or to do a supplemental budget, then they're allowed to exceed their appropriation. Which gets back to what
Well-
I said during my first round of questions. What is the meaning of the budget we adopt if all an agency has to do is overspend and it'll be reprogrammed?
they have not overspent, and then there's a reprogramming. We do these processes to identify rates of overspending, and then.
Well, I want to go there in a minute. So, but let me just finish with on the spend plans. So I think what I heard from Mr. Kennedy is that the spend plans are adjusted monthly because spending is dynamic. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, that shouldn't be, because then it's no longer a plan. The spending should be compared to the plan, not the
Mhm.
plan reflects the spending. Do you disagree?
I don't have an opinion. I just know
Well,
that
you
the
should have
spending
an
plan.
opinion, not to be too snotty here, but you should have an
Okay.
opinion. So years ago, I dealt with this with the Tenley Town Firehouse because it took years to build. It was way over how long it took to build. And so I started having meetings with it was the deputy mayor for contracting and procurement. And I would ask, what is the schedule for building the firehouse? And every couple of months, the schedule changed.
So if
You
I
know,
could, sir,
so, and I'm not saying that quite right. They would, instead of there ever being late, they kept changing the schedule to match reality, and therefore they were never late, even though the firehouse was years behind what the schedule was. The spend plan is the plan. Maybe it changes if there's a revised budget, but it's
It
the
is-
plan, and spending is compared to the plan. If you keep changing the plan has no meaning.
so I don't know if there's.
Well, I'm not sure
question
there was a
here.
question there. There
Yes.
wasn't a question
Okay.
there, but there clearly was a firm statement there. So the DC code requires that the OCFO submit to the mayor and the council a quarterly report on spending for each agency. I assume it's DC code 47-355.05. I'm assuming that that's the same as the financial review reports,
Mhm.
FRPs. So how does the OCFO use these FRP reports? We've kind of talked about that. Who in the OCFO reviews these reports? We've kind of talked about that. How are the FRPs related to the quarterly spending plans? Well, I'm not convinced we have spending plans, so let me move on. I have to say, it is difficult to use the FRPs. On the council side, because we receive them long after they are useful. The reports are created 30 days after the quarter, which is relatively late to begin with. And they aren't posted to the FRP website until a month after that. That's 2 months after the quarter. How can the council use these reports when they are given to us sometimes 5 months after the overspending has started?
So if I can answer that, as I said,
So let me the second quarter FRP for DDOT was not posted to the FRP website until June 20th. Quarter ended March 31st.
as I've said many times, including in my testimony, the FRP final report, as inadequate as it might be, Councilmember Henderson, is the culmination of a long process. I believe that there's opportunities for us to engage either the council of the whole, yourself, council members, committee chairs, multiple times in the year ahead of those publications so that you are briefed on spending trends within the departments and their programs with those departments.
I'm sorry, but I don't know how long a process it is. For one thing, the DC Code 47-310.01 requires that not later than 15 days after the end of every calendar quarter, the mayor shall submit to the 2 congressional committees a report on the financial and budgetary status of the government of the District of Columbia for the previous quarter. I'm guessing that doesn't happen. But the point here is that's 15 days. The reality with the FRPs is it's 30 days, but then it's another 30 days before it's posted. But actually, sometimes it's as much as 5 months before it's posted, which is completely not useful. And you said it's a long process. And why am I sounding a little angry? Well, because I looked at the DDOT FRPs. The December 31st FRP for DDOT notes with regard to overtime that the early January heavy snowfall caused overtime to increase. This is the FRP for December 31st. That says, quote, the early January heavy snowfall caused overtime to increase. Okay, the FRP for December 31st and also for March 31st states, quote, overtime is heavily impacted by HVAC maintenance needs in the hot summer months, as well as work for school reopenings in late summer, unquote. That's the FRP for December 31st, and the second one, March 31st, quote, overtime is heavily impacted by HVAC maintenance needs in the hot summer months, as well as work for school reopenings in late summer, unquote. I'm not getting the extensive work here. And the language is virtually identical in these reports. And also just bizarre to say overspending as of December 31st is due to something that's happening in January and then in the summer. Maybe there's not a question there. I think it's embarrassing. And I know I'm over my time, but I'm going to. The second quarter FRP for DDOT. The second quarter FRP for DDOT identified the same spending pressure, which was sort of some of what I just talked about, had the exact same gap closing analysis, and that the agency would not be able to close the gap. But that report was in early May. Early May. The supplemental budget wasn't even sent to us until almost 3 weeks later. So they have a $26 million spending pressure. Maybe it was a little bit less for the second quarter. The supplemental budget wasn't even sent to us until 3 weeks later. And the supplemental budget, instead of correcting the spending pressure, cut an additional $6.1 million from DDOT, making the problem worse. Why didn't the FRP, which showed a spending pressure, translate into action in the supplemental when the agency couldn't see a way of fixing the overspending?
So this, and I don't know if you felt it was adequately addressed when Jenny and I had the first roundtable.
Are you talking about a month ago with regard to the reprogramming that came to us in October?
I'm-
I'm reading the FRPs from March.
Yeah, I'm going to address that. So the issue there is we have what we call items to watch. They're not actual spending pressures. They don't translate into spending pressures. And so early on, you said, initially, when you got our list of spending pressures for the FY 2025, I think in June, it was like 180 million. From that 180 million, it came down to about 103 million.
Hold on a second. I had meetings in the CFO's office where I was told that that was projected overspending. It was not items to watch. It was overspending.
I understand that was projected.
We were not allowed to spend a penny of the identified surplus because of this projected overspending, not items to
That's
watch.
correct. That is correct.
Overspending.
That is correct.
Okay, so don't
So-
minimize it.
No, why not? I'm saying that let's just stick with projected spending pressures. So you have a projected spending pressure of 25 million, and you have that in March. Let's say somewhere around July, August, something changed that you didn't anticipate, that you didn't see happening. Now that spending pressure has dropped to 18 million. Then sometime in August, you find a way to mitigate part of that 18 million so that it's now 10 million. So you've gone from this big number to a much smaller number, but you can't see that in advance of it because you don't have the information. And so spending pressures are not finite. We actually forecast them, or what we see at the time we see them. And so, so they change, and usually they get lower. But we have to take them seriously at every level until such time as we can confirm that they're not what we initially thought. So when we tell you that there is a spending pressure, there is no way for you I will never tell you that unless that agency is currently in deficit, I will never say to you that that is 100% what it's going to be, unless they're already in deficit. Because it's a projection. It's
So
a
then why were
forecast.
you before me a couple of weeks ago saying we needed to approve the reprogramming because they had overspent?
I did not say that. Jenny said that. I did not say that. I stayed silent because it's
Your
not my
testimony-
job to
the
advocate for
testimony-
that.
The testimony at the table was
Mhm.
the agency was overspending.
But it was not me. I do not advocate that you.
Then you should have told me that it was wrong.
No, she is correct in that when she said that they have.
But which is it?
So,
Are they?
but you're
overspending?
talking two different issues now.
Yeah.
I'm talking about at the beginning of forecasting a spending pressure, because you talked about it being 180, it changed.
Yes,
The year.
the CFO's office, it was 180 million.
Mhm.
Jen Budoff said, well, she had talked to Jenny Reed, who said they could get it down to 105.
Yep,
The CFO said that that was a little too speculative.
because we're
Don't wanna
forecast,
add-
we're financial folks, so we're always going to caution on
Guess
that.
what? 105 million is still 105
That's
million
correct.
overspending.
Yes, sir.
And if it's 26 million or it's 20 million, it's still overspending it by DDOT. It's still
So
overspending. And what did the FRP say? The FRP said that,
it said it was 26 million, I believe, or something around it, and it dropped by 9 million.
the FRP said, quote, the agency will not be able to close the gap, unquote.
If the gap remained or said it.
Quote, the
It is.
agency will not be able to close the gap. It
Got
didn't
it.
say, quote, this is speculative.
It's not going to say it's speculative. It shouldn't say it's speculative. It's what they know at the time.
Okay, and so you're also sidestepping the point that there is the spending pressure, the spending pressure in the FRP for 2 quarters in a row was significant.
Yes.
And yet the CFO certified, I believe you certified the supplemental request.
Mhm.
In any event, you allowed the supplemental to come forward,
Mhm.
that rather than address the spending gap, that quote, the agency will not be able to close, unquote, you cut an additional 6.1 million.
I didn't.
Yes, you did.
The mayor's office cut it.
You had nothing to do with it.
No.
Really?
Yes.
What's the role of the CFO when we get a budget proposal from the mayor?
So if you're asking, did we approve the supplemental? That is correct.
And what did the supplemental do? Cut DDOT by 6.1 million.
And DDOT ended the year, the spending pressure, which was in the
26 million,
in the FRP, it was 26 million.
ended the year with about 20 million.
It dropped by 9 million, 8.9 million to be exact. It dropped by that.
Okay, from
And-
26 to 17, okay.
And so
It's
there was,
deficit, 17 million.
yeah, so,
What happened? Did it go to Bradby? No. Did anybody do
but it
anything?
didn't go to Brad V because
Spending-
they're not in deficit.
because of the reprogramming.
Don't approve the reprogramming,
They
it
will.
will go to Brad V.
Councilmember Fruman, if there's time
All right,
left.
thank you very much. But I'm gonna start with just a couple of questions, and my first question is there any way, I heard hard stop 4:30. Is there any way you can stay for 10 more minutes so Councilmember Henderson can have a chance?
Yes, thank
Yes,
you.
okay. All right, I will try not to use
Please.
10 minutes, but that's liberating. Thank you very much. So part of the frustration here is, and first, many kudos to the auditor, Kathy Patterson, who came to the council and talked about the FRP process and in some ways initiated this process of digging in. And it's a lot of learning that we've been doing. And thank you to the chairman for organizing it. What I'm hearing is the monthly spend plans are a thing that moves during the course of the year. And so I need to know, I need to see, and my takeaway is I need to see the monthly spend plan at the beginning of the year.
Yes,
The other thing that I'm learning is the FRP process is a continuous process that everybody but the council is a part of. And a result comes out a couple of months after, in the best case, a couple of months after the close of the quarter. And that if I, as a committee chair, want to be tracking in real time, it's not that I have to be part of the same process, but I need to be communicating with you at every step along the way so that I'm aware of what those kinds of pressures are happening. Another thing that I am taking away is that apportionment, which I had thought was a quarterly thing, is really much more an annual thing. And so then all of these issues become solved either through a supplemental or a reprogramming. And much of that happens in the middle of the fiscal year and towards the end of the fiscal year. There may be internal movement of dollars inside of the agency, and that's a way that it's addressed. But those are not visible to me at this point until I see the FRP, which could be significantly after the fact. So I think the picture is becoming clear, but the need for greater information is, and more real-time information is acute. And so that's my takeaway, and I think it's constructive, and I'm not going to, don't want to go on too long, but I do want to get you in my office and have a conversation about these kinds of things and how we can make it better going forward.
thank you. And you do appreciate that that's the spirit that we're coming here. We're making adjustments to these plans, as pointed out, and we encourage engagement by committee chairs.
And I actually think, like, we have shared goals. I think that you, in many ways, are trying to impose more discipline on the budget process, and we are too. So we
Thank you.
are allies in that. And part of when Auditor Patterson came to the council, what she said was there was a time when this FRP process was more robust and gave greater insight to the council. And I think this is not under you, but under predecessors at a time where we were fat and happy and people didn't worry about overspending. That process may have atrophied, and now we're in a different situation where dollars are tighter and we need the kind of oversight that may have once existed. Let's build it together.
Absolutely concur.
On the overtime point that Councilmember Henderson raised, that's another thing that I won't going to want to be in a back and forth with you about. We have to be real about it, and we have to have good oversight, and it has to be built in. So let's do that. One of the things that's on the horizon is the contingency list. And this is a separate subject, but it's related to where are we in relation to our budget. When do you expect to be able to certify what will be funded on the contingency list from the FY26 budget, from the FY25 supplemental?
Yeah, we will start identifying that in detail at the end of this quarter into the early part of next quarter. Clearly, there's some headline issues that we know about unrelated to the district. For example, the shutdown and some of the implications that will more than likely need to be supported through the contingency fund. I believe that's what you're asking about, correct?
That's one of the things that, but is it at the end of this quarter, meaning after December 31st, or is it the end of this quarter, meaning?
Sorry. Go ahead.
So I think the question is, are we able to accommodate, not accommodate, but the BSA says November 15th. I didn't, no, thank you.
Yes.
Is this? Thank you, Jim.
The wrong answer.
Yeah.
There we go.
So by November 15th,
Yes.
we should know what can be funded and what can't be funded. Last thing, there was a conversation about the debt service and that account and how there may be variances there. And let me just outline how I understand it, and you tell me if I have it wrong. The debt service that we're going to pay in any given year is not just a function of the new debt that gets issued in that year. It's a function of the interest on the existing debt. So that's a big chunk of money. And then we have a plan for what is the new debt that's going to be issued in the course of that year. And that's based on assumptions around when projects are going to start and how things will be drawn. It'll be based on what are anticipated interest rates in that period. And it may well be, if we have $1 billion capital plan and it happens more slowly than had been in that fiscal year, and it is initiated more slowly than had been built into the budget, then there will be additional dollars. Also, if the interest rate that we can get is lower than what was built into the assumptions, there can be additional dollars. And it's that variance in the fiscal year on the pace of spending and the interest rate of the draws that could result in more dollars being available in that pot than we needed to spend based on the assumptions going into the fiscal year.
That
Do I
is
have it?
correct. That is correct. And we periodically do that evaluation in order to size the next coming size, determine the amount of the next set of bonds we're going to sell, and that occurs late in the summer. That's when we realized that a handful of factors worked toward having less debt service in the net new issuances we had, plus some savings from refinancing that led to the budget for that category being above what the actual expense needed to be.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say that if one wanted in a budget formulation process to create a pool of money that you could then draw on, what you would do is base the budget for debt service on an overly aggressive schedule for draws that we likely wouldn't meet, or base it on a higher than necessary interest rate.
Yeah. So just to be clear, our draws are planned on what's expected in the budget. There is a whole series of things that go along with the budget once we determine how much debt proceeds we need. And so our plan is to ensure that we can secure those debt proceeds. To the extent there's less spending that we determine, then that's automatically saving. So think of what's in the budget is a legally necessary cap to what debt service we need associated with the to the bond proceeds that we need to draw.
Yeah, I guess I'd hope not to use 10 minutes, but is that based on everything, the draw happens on October 1 for everything in the capital plan, or is it everything new in the capital plan, or is it it's based on a schedule of draws based on an anticipated plan for spending under the capital plan?
More or less the latter. And appreciate the capital plan is what you adopt in the budget.
Right, but that schedule of when things are going to happen, if things happen more slowly, then you're going to have extra dollars.
Correct.
Okay. I'm determined to end before 10 minutes, so I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. CFO. I'll be quick. I just want to go back to the conversation around overtime. And I can appreciate, Mr. Cannon, your testimony around the rebasing that's going to take place here. But I would say a frustration that I have had is, I think one of the ways that we ease overtime is to increase staffing overall, improve work conditions so that you can retain the individuals that you have. And it is a cheaper, right? I'm not paying, time and a half for someone to do the same work that you would for otherwise. There are other methods in terms of other policy pieces, right? They often talk about the leave policy for the district and how that has caused a need for an over-reliance on overtime. So in my time on the council, I think it's even like FY24, for instance, we had an agency that had a persistent issue in terms of overtime. So said, all right, we'll work to find you additional FTEs so you could hire. Gave them the FTEs. What do? They reprogram the FTEs away and they continue to rely on overtime. So now I'm kind of like, well, then I tried to solve the issue, but you don't seem interested in actually solving the problem. But I don't necessarily know who is the appropriate entity to have that come to Jesus conversation with, whether it be the CA or the director of the agency, which is, you have an overtime problem. There are only but 3 ways you can solve your overtime problem, and you keep reprogramming away the options that are being brought to you. When it comes to some of these issues, and I know you often say, well, that's a policy decision. Well, that's a policy decision. Well, that's a policy decision. At what point is it not just prudent fiscal controls?
That's an interesting line, and I would sure at different points in time, all of us would have on the margin different interpretations of that. I appreciate we're in a role where we really work hard to be neutral. What you're describing, though, is a fundamental fiscal issue that we certainly can provide far more details about the phenomena, maybe good estimates about the implications of different policy choices that come to you through a formulated budget proposal. There is a point in time, and I can have Eric explain, where if a proposed budget that you have is literally spend $10 on something that's cost $50 million the last 3 years, of course we say no. Of course we push back.
Okay.
But there's margins there that are ultimately a call. And I agree that overall labor policy, working conditions, your relationship with your labor partners ultimately leads to these fiscal impacts, as well as a choice of level of service relative to those costs.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I think that you often say we're neutral, we call the balls and strikes, we're the arbiter, but then who is the backstop to say you have to stop spending? You guys write the checks. Technically, check wires, I don't know, however we pay people these days.
Right.
What is the backstop to say stop?
Yeah.
Or is it, we'll figure it out on the back end, or at month 13?
My observation is there are practices for reprogramming and supplemental budgets that are quite routine for the district.
Yeah.
And I think practices and processes are always stressed when you're in a different and challenging environment the way we are right now. That's my observation. And perhaps we're all in a position of, because reprogrammings are 99% approved, 99.5% approved, that is the result, the last choice that's still viable to solve a particular problem as you're describing.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
one could read the law to say, you all say no to reprogrammings, and then people overspend and they go to the Bradby board.
How many people have been before the Bradby board in the last 5 years?
I actually provided that information to someone, but I don't know off the top of my head. So can we send it to you?
Sure,
It's
but
very small.
I guess the
Yeah.
essence of my question is rather, we've got this thing, does it actually even exist? Does anybody even make it there?
I think so.
Yes, there are.
Yeah. Because let me say it a different way, actually. I don't have the lion's share. I don't have every person that goes to Bradley. I learned that 2 days ago. I only have it as it relates to budget spending. There are other reasons for a person to go to Bradby. So I at least can provide you from a budget perspective, folks that
We'll provide
violate.
the
Yeah.
total.
There have been referrals to Bradley in the past 2 years.
Okay, I'd love to know what the referrals were for and then what the outcomes
Mhm.
were. Because again, if we have these controls, but they're like controls, and in practice, nobody takes it seriously as an actual accountability mechanism and tool, then, you know, there's that. And I can appreciate what you're saying, CFO Lee, right? When the monies were flowing, perhaps people were much more lenient, and now we're having to have these more difficult conversations
Absolutely.
on that. And maybe just overall in good practice, there needs to be that, because when I'm looking through even the e-circulations for today, the number of reprogrammings that are coming through, both for fiscal year 2025 and now for 2026. And it is 29 days into 26, and you're already sending me reprogrammings. Now, a couple of them I'm aware were coming, and that's mainly because the agency didn't do what they were supposed to do during the budget process, and we didn't have time to create all of these new positions that they wanted, and so they had to go through the reprogramming process. But for some of these others, it kind of feels like y'all are trying to take us, y'all, not y'all,
Mhm.
y'all
Collectively.
are trying to take a second bite at the budget apple, and then are going to say, oh, well, if you don't do this, then teachers aren't going to get their supply cards, or some other sort of extra phenomenon type of deal. How do we get control of that process? And what I am hearing you say is, you council also have to be willing to say no.
Correct, but there are several steps here.
Okay.
First, appreciating that we've had years and years and years of large surpluses that provided opportunities just to let these programmings go without a lot of scrutiny that you all needed to bring to the table, from my observation.
Yeah.
We're no longer there. In fact, for fiscal year 24, we didn't end the year with enough resources relative to several different obligations that we had. First time in years, as I understand. Second, we all have an obligation, my office, to formulate budgets correctly. And as we all learned, thanks to you, sir, to be very public about this, is that there were obligations we knew about and expenses we knew about that we never budgeted for. We just depended on the surplus to pay for. Our obligation is say no more. That's an example.
Okay.
Along with, I'm asking our budget office to look at chronic gaps between what's been approved for budget at a granular level, particular spending category, and what has been supplemented either legally supplemented, either by a reprogramming or a supplemental. And then insist that the formulation now deal with those chronic issues. That's from our point of view, what we can add to the equation.
Okay. I think that's helpful. I think it was also helpful, the AFOs that are in my cluster are a wealth of information that perhaps we don't tap enough in order having conversations with them.
Mhm.
And I know that I would hope that many of my colleagues would do that more. There used to be an AFO at DCPS, she's now retired. She would, when I was committee director for the Committee on Education, she would say, Christina, you're not asking the right question. And I'm like, oh, okay. You want to try that question again? Okay, yes, ma'am. You know, sort of like the lead to where you want to, hey, we see what's happening every day. And so we want to tell you, like, this is where you really should be focusing. This is an area of issue that should be rising to the forefront. And so to the extent that your AFOs feel like they have the power to have those conversations, they certainly would be welcomed, I feel like, at least in the health cluster.
As I said in my testimony, and I've said 3 times, that kind of early engagement is very important. And I won't use the individual's name you're referring to, but we have this person's name principle that I want us as an organization to bring back to the table because we're in dramatically different fiscal times. And so to the extent, working with committee chairs, with the committee as a whole, to bring more frequent discussions about financial conditions, that's welcomed, and I think that's our obligation right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. You said you had to leave.
I do.
There are some more questions, so I'm going to recess this hearing. I want to remind you, there are at least two things that you said you would get to us.
Please.
One was my request for the agency spend plans as of October
Mhm.
1st for DME, OVSJG, Department of Healthcare Finance, and DGS.
Yes, and we'll make them all available. So,
And how many people have appeared before Brad V? That was your latest offering.
yes,
And that was regarding overspending. You were clear that had to do with spending. You look like you,
I have a question, but earlier you'd said you wanted it for either 25 or for 24. You want the monthly spending plans. They're working on that right now.
the spending plan required by DC Code 47-355.04 by October 1st of each year, an agency head and agency fiscal officer shall jointly submit to the chief financial officer a monthly spending plan.
Okay.
we know.
All right.
Thank you.
So we will determine the recess date. The time is 4:43 PM and this roundtable is recessed.